The whispers slithered through Silvercreek like rattlesnakes in tall grass, coiling around Grace Fairchild's name until the truth was strangled by speculation. The townsfolk gathered at the general store, saloon, and after Sunday service to trade theories about the young woman who'd arrived 6 months prior. Her past as mysterious as the contents of the locked trunk she'd brought with her. "Heard she's running from the law back east," muttered Agnes Wilcox, the elderly widow who owned the boarding house where Grace resided. "Keeps odd hours, writes letters by candlelight. My cousin in Denver says a woman matching her description swindled a banker out of his fortune," added the blacksmith, though he'd never received such correspondence. Grace was aware of the rumors, felt them clinging to her skirts as she walked down Main Street to her position at the town's only hotel. 24 years old, with chestnut hair that refused to stay pinned and eyes the color of sage after rain, she held her head high despite the sideways glances. The West was supposed to be her fresh start, but it seemed the dust of suspicion followed her even here, 2,000 miles from Philadelphia. The summer of 1876 blazed across Colorado territory, the centennial year bringing optimism to some but only more wariness to Grace. She'd taken to walking the long way to avoid passing the saloon, where the men's voices grew louder and their theories more outlandish with each whiskey poured. "Miss Fairchild?" Grace turned to see Mrs. Palmer, the hotel owner's wife, bustling toward her with a ledger clutched to her chest. "I need you to take inventory of the linens. We're expecting a cattle buyer from Kansas City tomorrow, and every room must be perfect." "Yes, madam," Grace replied, grateful for the distraction of work. The hotel lobby was mercifully cool compared to the scorching street outside. Grace had just begun counting pillowcases when the doors swung open, admitting a tall figure silhouetted against the bright afternoon sun. He stepped into the dimness, and Grace found herself looking up at a stranger with shoulders broad enough to fill a doorway. Dusty from the trail, his clothes bore the unmistakable signs of a man who lived in the saddle. The stranger removed his hat, revealing tousled hair the color of wet sand and eyes as blue as a mountain lake. "Afternoon," he said, voice low and rough like a stream over stones. "Name's Knox Anderson." "Looking for a room for a spell." Grace straightened, suddenly conscious of the loose tendril of hair tickling her cheek. "Of course, Mr. Anderson, we have availability. How long will you be staying?" "Hard to say," he replied, glancing around the lobby before settling his gaze back on her. "Got business that needs tending." Mrs. Palmer appeared from the back office, eyeing the newcomer with the practiced assessment of a hotelier who'd seen all kinds pass through her establishment. "Mr. Anderson," Grace said, "this is Mrs. Palmer, the proprietor's wife." The older woman nodded. "Welcome to the Silvercreek Hotel. Miss Fairchild will get you settled. Our best available room is $3 a night, includes breakfast." As Mrs. Palmer retreated, Knox Anderson signed the ledger, his handwriting surprisingly neat for a man with calloused hands. Grace couldn't help noticing a long scar that ran from his knuckles to his wrist. "Room 4 is prepared," Grace said, retrieving a key from the rack. "Up the stairs, second door on your left. Do you have luggage to bring in?" "Just saddlebags, I travel light." He nodded toward the street where a chestnut gelding stood patiently at the hitching post. Grace handed him the key, their fingers brushing momentarily. A strange sensation fluttered in her chest, one she promptly dismissed. "Dinner is served from 5 until 7, she added professionally. Knox studied her face for a moment longer than was comfortable. "You're not from around here." It wasn't a question, and Grace stiffened slightly. "Neither are you, Mr. Anderson." A smile tugged at one corner of his mouth. "Reckon that's true enough." He settled his hat back on his head, tipped it slightly, and headed outside to collect his belongings. Grace released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Something about the man unsettled her, though whether it was wariness or something else entirely, she couldn't say. By the following morning, Knox Anderson had become the newest subject of Silvercreek's whispered speculations. Grace overheard the cook and a kitchen maid discussing him as she collected breakfast trays. "Heard he's hunting someone," the cook said in a hushed tone. "Marshall Hicks says he was asking questions about recent arrivals to town." Grace nearly dropped the coffee pot she was carrying. Was he looking for her? Panic fluttered in her chest like a caged bird. She'd been so careful, changed her name, told no one where she was headed. Throughout the day, she watched Knox Anderson from the corner of her eye as he moved through town with the deliberate pace of a man conducting business. He spoke with the blacksmith, the general store owner, and even old Dr. Williams. Each time he returned to the hotel, his gaze found her curious and assessing. 3 days into his stay, Grace was arranging flowers in the lobby when Knox approached the desk. "Miss Fairchild," he said, leaning against the polished wood counter. "I was wondering if you might recommend somewhere a man could get a decent meal that isn't hotel fare. No offense to your cook." Grace hesitated. Personal conversation wasn't part of her duties, and she'd made a point of keeping interactions strictly professional. "Miller's Cafe serves a good steak," she finally replied. "Though I'm told the stew at the Silver Dollar is passable if you don't mind the company." Knox studied her for a moment. "Would you join me for dinner at Miller's this evening, 7 o'clock? Grace nearly pricked her finger on a rose thorn. That wouldn't be appropriate, Mr. Anderson. I'm an employee here." "Just dinner," he said easily. "I've been traveling alone for weeks. Conversation would be welcome." "I'm afraid I must decline." She turned back to the flowers, hoping he would take the hint. Knox didn't push. "Fair enough. Another time, perhaps." He headed for the door, then paused. "You know, Miss Fairchild, this town talks a lot about people they don't know much about. Seems to me a person ought to be judged by what they do, not what folks say they've done." With that cryptic remark, he left, leaving Grace to wonder if he knew more than he was letting on. That evening, Grace finished her shift and slipped out the back entrance of the hotel, planning to avoid Main Street entirely. The setting sun cast long shadows as she hurried along the alley that would take her to the boarding house. "Evening, Miss Fairchild." She gasped, whirling to find Knox Anderson leaning against the corner of the building as if he'd been waiting for her. "Mr. Anderson, you startled me." "Didn't mean to," he said, straightening. "Just happened to be heading this way myself." Grace didn't believe that for a second. "Are you following me?" His expression turned serious. "Not in the way you're thinking, but we need to talk somewhere private." "I have nothing to discuss with you," she said, backing away. "I know who you are," Knox said quietly, "and I know what you're running from." The blood drained from Grace's face. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Grace Bennett from Philadelphia," he continued. "Daughter of Judge William Bennett." Hearing her real surname spoken aloud after months of hiding sent a chill down her spine. "Who are you really?" she demanded, voice barely above a whisper. "I told you my name," Knox replied, "but what I didn't say is I work for the Pinkerton Detective Agency." He reached into his coat and withdrew a badge. Grace's legs nearly gave way beneath her. "He sent you," she whispered. "Victor sent you to bring me back." Knox's brow furrowed. "Victor Randall?" "No, miss. Judge Bennett hired us to find you to make sure you're safe." "My father." Grace couldn't hide her surprise. "But after what happened, perhaps we should continue this conversation somewhere less exposed," Knox suggested, glancing around the alley. "I promise you're in no danger from me." Against her better judgment, Grace nodded. "There's a gazebo behind the church. No one will be there at this hour." They walked in silence, Grace's mind racing with possibilities. The gazebo was empty as she'd predicted, offering privacy but still visible enough from the street to be proper. Once seated, Knox spoke. "Your father has been frantic since you disappeared. When Victor Randall started making accusations about your character after you left, Judge Bennett knew something wasn't right. He hired us to find you." Grace's hands trembled in her lap. "Victor threatened to ruin my father if I didn't marry him. When I refused, he said he'd ensure no respectable man in Philadelphia would have me." She looked up at Knox. "So I left. I couldn't bear to see my father's reputation destroyed because of me." "Randall's been discredited," Knox said. "Your father discovered he'd been embezzling from his law practice and had evidence of similar schemes with other wealthy families. He's facing charges now." Relief washed over Grace like cool water. "So I don't need to hide anymore." "No," Knox confirmed. "Your name's been cleared. Your father asked me to give you this." He reached into his coat again, extracting an envelope. Grace accepted it with trembling fingers, recognizing her father's handwriting immediately. The letter was dated 3 months earlier, filled with expressions of love and concern, explaining everything Knox had just told her and begging her to come home or at least let him know she was safe. Tears blurred the words as she finished reading. "I never thought." She began, then stopped, overwhelmed. Your father loves you very much, Knox said softly. Enough to send me halfway across the country to find you. Grace wiped her eyes. How did you find me? That's my job, he replied with a slight smile. You left traces the stage coach ticket, a hotel register in Denver where you first used the name Fairchild. It took time, but I'm good at what I do. And now that you've found me, will you take me back to Philadelphia? Knox shook his head. My job was to find you, deliver your father's message, and ensure you're safe. What you do next is your choice. Judge Bennett was very clear about that. As dusk deepened around them, Grace felt a weight lifting that she'd carried for months. The rumors that had dogged her steps from Philadelphia to Silvercreek were just that, rumors, yet new questions arose in their place. The townspeople here will still talk, she said pensively. They've been speculating about me since I arrived. Small towns run on gossip, Knox observed. But you can choose whether to let it matter. They sat in companionable silence as stars began to appear in the darkening sky. Grace studied Knox's profile, seeing him in a new light. Not a threat, but someone who'd crossed mountains and prairies to deliver hope when she'd thought all was lost. Will you be leaving now? She asked, surprised by her reluctance at the thought. Knox turned to meet her gaze. My assignment is complete, but I've been on the trail a long while. Might stay in Silvercreek a few days, rest my horse before deciding where to go next. In the days that followed, Grace noticed a subtle shift in how the townspeople regarded her. Knox Anderson had been seen conversing with various citizens, his Pinkerton credentials apparently carrying weight. The whispers didn't cease entirely, but they took on a different quality, curiosity rather than suspicion. Grace wrote a long letter to her father, explaining everything that had happened since she'd fled Philadelphia. Knox offered to ensure it reached Judge Bennett directly, an offer she gratefully accepted. Will you return to Philadelphia? Knox asked one evening as they walked along the creek that gave the town its name. The water burbled over rocks, catching the sunset's golden light. Grace had been contemplating this question since receiving her father's letter. I don't know, she admitted. Part of me longs to see my father, but Philadelphia holds painful memories now. She glanced at Knox. And the West has begun to feel like home in ways I never expected. Knox bent to pick up a flat stone, skipping it across the water. The West gives a person room to breathe, to become who they truly are without the weight of society's expectations. Is that why you became a Pinkerton instead of following a more traditional path? Knox's lips curved into a smile. Perceptive question. My father wanted me to take over the family banking business in Boston. I lasted exactly 3 months behind a desk before I knew I'd suffocate there. How did you become a detective? Pure chance. I was in Chicago, nearly broke and contemplating my next move when I witnessed a pickpocket operation. Caught the thief, returned a wallet to a gentleman who turned out to be one of Pinkerton's senior agents. He offered me a job. And you've never regretted it. The constant travel, the danger. Knox considered this. There are lonely nights on the trail when I wonder what it would be like to have a place to call home, people waiting for my return. But then I remember what it felt like being trapped in that bank office, and the doubts pass. They walked in silence for a while, the evening air cool against their skin. What about you? Knox asked eventually. What would you do if you stayed in the West? Grace hadn't allowed herself to think that far ahead, focused as she'd been on simply surviving. I'm not sure. I enjoy working at the hotel, meeting travelers from all over. Perhaps someday I could have a place of my own, a small inn, perhaps. You'd be good at that, Knox observed. You have a way of making people feel welcome. The compliment warmed Grace unexpectedly. Thank you. As they rounded a bend in the creek, the town came back into view, lights beginning to twinkle in windows as dusk deepened. Grace realized with a start that for the first time in months, she felt truly at ease in someone's company. The following Sunday, Grace attended church service as usual, sitting in her customary pew near the back. To her surprise, Knox Anderson slipped in beside her just as the opening hymn began. He wasn't wearing his trail clothes but a clean dark suit that transformed his appearance. His hair was neatly combed and he'd clearly shaved that morning. Several heads turned to observe them sitting together, and Grace felt a flush rise to her cheeks. Didn't take you for the religious type, she whispered as they sat down after the hymn. There's a lot you don't know about me yet, he replied with a small smile. that yet lingered in Grace's mind throughout the sermon, which she barely heard. After the service, they joined the congregation outside where people gathered in small groups to socialize. Mrs. Palmer approached them, her keen eyes missing nothing. "Mr. Anderson, Miss Fairchild, lovely service, wasn't it?" "Indeed," Knox agreed politely. "Reverend Thompson has a gift for making scripture relevant to everyday life." Miss Fairchild, Mrs. Palmer continued, "I've been meaning to ask if you'd consider taking on additional responsibilities at the hotel. Mr. Palmer and I have been discussing expanding our services, perhaps offering afternoon tea for ladies. Your Eastern background would be invaluable in setting the right tone." Grace blinked in surprise. "I'd be honored to help, Mrs. Palmer. Excellent, we'll discuss details tomorrow." The older woman smiled warmly, a far cry from her usual businesslike demeanor, before moving on to greet other parishioners. "That's new," Grace murmured, watching Mrs. Palmer depart. Knox chuckled. "Amazing how quickly perspectives can change." "What did you tell them about me?" Grace asked suspiciously. "Only the truth," Knox replied. "That you're the daughter of a respected judge who came west seeking adventure and new experiences, nothing about your private matters." Grace was about to respond when she noticed Agnes Wilcox, her landlady, watching them with undisguised interest. "Would you like to join me for Sunday dinner?" she asked impulsively. "Mrs. Wilcox always prepares more than we can eat at the boarding house, and guests are welcome." Knox's eyes warmed. "I'd like that very much." Sunday dinner at the boarding house proved to be a turning point. Knox charmed Mrs. Wilcox and the other boarders with tales of his adventures tracking fugitives across the frontier. Without revealing Grace's personal history, he managed to convey that she came from a respectable Eastern family and had his highest regard. By the time they stepped onto the porch after dinner, the evening air was cool and stars spangled the sky above Silvercreek. "Thank you," Grace said softly. "For everything you've done." Knox leaned against the porch railing. "I haven't done much besides deliver a letter." "You've done more than that," she insisted. "You've given me back my good name, even if the townspeople don't know the whole story." "A good name is worth protecting," Knox agreed. "My father taught me that much, at least." In the silvery moonlight, his features looked softer, the hard lines of his professional demeanor relaxed. Grace found herself studying the strong curve of his jaw, the way his eyes crinkled slightly at the corners when he smiled. "Will you be leaving soon?" she asked, the question that had been hovering between them for days. Knox was quiet for a moment. "I received a telegram from the agency yesterday. There's a new assignment if I want it, tracking a counterfeiting ring in Wyoming territory." Grace's heart sank. "I see." "I haven't given my answer yet," Knox continued. "For the first time in my career, I'm finding myself reluctant to move on so quickly." Their eyes met in the darkness, and Grace felt something shift between them, a current as tangible as the night breeze ruffling her skirts. "Why is that?" she asked, barely above a whisper. Knox straightened, taking a step toward her. "I think you know, Grace." The sound of her given name on his lips sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with the evening chill. "Knox," she began, unsure what she intended to say. He reached out slowly, giving her time to withdraw if she wished, and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. His touch was gentle, at odds with the strength she knew his hands possessed. "I've spent my life moving from one assignment to the next," he said quietly. "Never staying anywhere long enough to put down roots. I told myself that's what I wanted: freedom, adventure, the open road always calling." Grace hardly dared breathe. "And now I'm wondering if I've been running from something all along, just like you were." His hand moved to cup her cheek. "If maybe there's more courage in staying than in always moving on." Before Grace could respond, the boarding house door opened, and Mrs. Wilcox appeared with a lantern. "Miss Fairchild, it's getting chilly out. Would you and Mr. Anderson care for some coffee?" The moment broken, Knox stepped back. "Thank you, madam, but I should be getting back to the hotel. It's been a pleasure dining with you." As he bid them good night and descended the porch steps, Grace felt both disappointment and a strange sense of anticipation. Something had begun between them, something neither had put into words yet. The following week brought changes to Silvercreek. News arrived that the railroad spur line would indeed be extended to reach the town, causing excitement among the business owners who anticipated increased commerce. Grace found herself busier than ever at the hotel as travelers came to assess investment opportunities. Knox remained in town, sending a telegram to the Pinkerton office requesting a delay before his next assignment. He began spending evenings at the hotel, sometimes in conversation with visiting businessmen, other times simply reading in a corner chair where he could observe Grace as she worked. One evening, as she was preparing to leave for the day, Knox approached the front desk. "I've been thinking," he said without preamble, "about what you said regarding your interest in running an establishment of your own someday." Grace set down her shawl. "Yes, the old Wainwright property at the edge of town is for sale. It was a way station before the stage-coach route changed. Has a main house, stables, good water. With the railroad coming, it could make an excellent small inn or way station for travelers not wanting to stay in the heart of town." Grace stared at him. "That sounds wonderful, but I could never afford such a property." "I took the liberty of inquiring about the price," Knox continued. "It's reasonable considering the structures and acreage, and—" He hesitated. "I received a letter from your father in response to yours. He's included a bank draft. He says it's money from your grandmother's trust that was always intended for you. He wants you to use it however you see fit to come home or to build a new life here." Grace's hands trembled as Knox handed her an envelope. Inside was indeed a bank draft for a substantial sum, along with another letter from her father expressing his love and support for whatever path she chose. "He wants me to be happy," she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. Knox's gaze was steady. "As do I." The property was everything Knox had described and more. The main house needed work but had good bones: 4 bedrooms upstairs, a spacious kitchen, and a welcoming parlor with a stone fireplace. The stables could house up to 8 horses, and the views of the mountains were spectacular. "It's perfect," Grace breathed as they walked the grounds. Travelers coming by rail or road could stay here, away from the noise of town but close enough for convenience. Knox watched her face as she envisioned the possibilities. "You could create something special here, Grace." She turned to him, suddenly struck by the realization that he was making plans that didn't include himself. "Will you be here to see it, or will you be tracking criminals in Wyoming by then?" Knox looked out over the property, his expression thoughtful. "I've been giving that a lot of thought. I wired the agency yesterday to decline the Wyoming assignment." Grace's heart quickened. "You're not taking it?" "No," he met her gaze directly. "I've requested a transfer to the Denver office. They need experienced agents to handle cases throughout the Colorado territory. I'd still travel some, but I'd have a home base. I could be in Silvercreek within a day's ride when I'm not on assignment." "You're staying in Colorado?" Grace couldn't keep the hope from her voice. Knox stepped closer, taking her hands in his. "Grace Bennett Fairchild, in all my years of tracking people across this country, I never expected to find someone I couldn't bear to walk away from. These past weeks with you have shown me what I've been missing: not just companionship, but a connection that makes me want to be better, to build something lasting." Grace squeezed his hands, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. "Knox, I'm not asking for promises," he continued. "We've both had our lives appended, and you have decisions to make about your future. All I'm asking is a chance to see where this road might lead us if we travel it together." In response, Grace rose on tiptoe and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was gentle at first, then deepened as Knox's arms encircled her waist, drawing her closer. When they finally parted, both were breathless. "I think," Grace said softly, "that's a journey I'd very much like to take." By Christmas, the transformation of the old Wainwright property into the Fairchild Inn was well underway. Grace had hired local craftsmen to repair the roof, replace broken windows, and restore the wide front porch that wrapped around 3 sides of the main house. Inside, she'd chosen furnishings that combined Eastern comfort with Western practicality. Knox divided his time between Denver and Silvercreek, his reputation as a Pinkerton detective lending an air of security to the establishment that appealed to travelers. When in town, he stayed in what Grace teasingly called the owner's suite, though they maintained separate residences until such time as their relationship might formalize. The railroad arrived in early December, bringing with it increased traffic and prosperity to Silvercreek. The Fairchild Inn quickly gained a reputation for its clean rooms. excellent meals, and the gracious hospitality of its owner on Christmas Eve. Guests gathered in the inn's parlor where a tall pine tree stood decorated with paper stars, strings of cranberries, and candles. Grace moved among them, ensuring everyone had enough mulled cider and Christmas cookies, aware of Knox's eyes following her from across the room. Later, after the guest had retired and the last embers glowed in the fireplace, Knox and Grace sat together on the parlor sofa, her head resting on his shoulder. "I have something for you," Knox said, reaching into his pocket. "A Christmas gift." He handed her a small package wrapped in brown paper and tied with string. Grace unwrapped it carefully to reveal a wooden box. Inside, nestled on a bed of cotton, was a gold locket on a delicate chain. "It's beautiful," she breathed, opening the heart-shaped pendant to find it empty. "But there's no picture." "I thought we could add one later," Knox said softly. "Perhaps a photograph of us together or of this place that's become your home." He hesitated, then added, "I have something else for you as well, something less tangible." From his other pocket, he withdrew an official-looking document. "I've resigned from the Pinkerton agency effective the first of the year." Grace stared at him in shock. "But your career will take a different path," Knox finished. "The sheriff here is getting on in years and has offered to recommend me as his replacement when he retires in the spring. It would mean staying in Silvercreek permanently, protecting this community." "Knox, are you certain? You've always valued your freedom." He took her hands in his. "I've discovered something more valuable, a sense of belonging. To a place." His gaze held her steadily. "To you, if you'll have me." Grace's heart swelled with emotion. "Are you asking what I think you're asking?" In answer, Knox slid from the sofa to one knee, still holding her hands. "Grace Fairchild, you came west carrying the dust of rumors and false accusations. I watched you transform that burden into something golden through your courage and determination. I love you and I want to spend my life by your side. Will you marry me?" Tears of joy spilled down Grace's cheeks. "Yes," she whispered. "With all my heart, yes." As the new year of 1877 dawned, preparations for a spring wedding began. Judge Bennett would travel from Philadelphia to give away his daughter, whose letters had grown increasingly joyful as she described the life she was building. The rumors that had once followed Grace like dust on the prairie wind had settled, replaced by genuine respect from the townspeople who now knew her as a successful businesswoman and the future wife of their new sheriff. On the morning of their wedding day, Knox found Grace standing on the inn's porch, watching the sunrise paint the mountains with gold. "Having second thoughts?" he asked, slipping his arms around her waist from behind. She leaned back against his chest, content. "Not one. Just thinking about how far we've both come. And how far we have yet to go together," Knox murmured against her hair. As the light of a new day washed over Silvercreek, Grace thought of the journey that had brought her west, the fear, the uncertainty, the whispered suspicions. What had once been bitter dust had indeed transformed into something precious beyond measure. A home, a purpose, and a love that had proven stronger than any rumor.